The object didn't belong there. That was the first thing Fleet Arbiter Senna Vale noticed when she reviewed the sensor logs from the Cathara perimeter station. Not an explosion, not a debris field, not the wreckage of a human vessel fleeing the occupation zone. Just a length of coiled metal cable, drifting alone through deep space, approximately 900 kilometers from the nearest navigational lane. It was frayed at both ends. No registry, no thermal signature, no ship in any direction that could have dropped it. The cable was perhaps 40 meters long, industrial grade by the look of the alloy composition, and it had been actually tied in a knot near its midpoint. A knot. Senna stared at the sensor image for a long time. Then she flagged it as debris, filed the log, and moved on. She would not remember flagging it, not until much later, not until the knot meant something else entirely. The Cathara Compact had mapped every human warship within 6 standard cycles of the Armistice Declaration. This was not a difficult task. The humans had made it easy by losing most of them. Of the 412 vessels humanity had fielded at the start of the Consolidation War, the Compact's intelligence division could account for 391. The remaining 21 were listed as probable losses, destroyed in engagements where sensor confirmation was impractical, or scuttled by retreating crews who preferred that outcome to surrender. 391 ships, confirmed positions, confirmed crew manifests, confirmed weapon loadouts sitting dormant in the 12 demilitarized zones the Armistice had carved into human space like surgical incisions. The Compact's senior strategists reviewed these numbers and felt something that, in their language, translated loosely as settled. Humans were finished as a military force. Not exterminated, the Compact was not barbaric but contained, managed. Their colonies still functioned. Their supply lines still moved. The occupation was clean by any civilized standard. They are not a threat, Arbiter Principal Derv told the High Council in the 43rd day after the armistice. Their remaining fleet cannot leave the demilitarized zones without triggering our sensor grid. Their shipyards are under continuous observation. Their fuel depots have been cataloged. They cannot build, cannot move, cannot coordinate. He paused because good rhetoric demanded it. Humanity is solved. No one on the council disagreed. The math was clear. The map was clear. What the map did not show was what the map had never been asked to find. Commander Yara Osai first heard the phrase, the quiet fleet, from a man who was supposed to be dead. His name was Petros Albrecht. He was listed in Compact records as KIA, engagement at the Doven Corridor, 7 months prior. He was, in practical terms, very much alive, sitting across from her in a mining habitat 3 astronomical units below the ecliptic of a system the Compact had surveyed twice and dismissed as economically worthless. The habitat smelled like machine oil and recycled atmosphere. The lighting was the particular orange yellow of failing solar cells stretched past their operational lifespan. Somewhere deeper in the structure, someone was welding, a sound like a sustained scream that came and went in 15-second intervals. Albrecht looked at her with the eyes of someone who had made a specific and permanent decision about the future. How many did you bring? 14, Yara said. 11 engineers, 2 pilots, and me. We came in on a salvage freighter. Compact inspection was 4 hours ago. They didn't find anything. They wouldn't, he said. They never look at the right things. That was the moment she understood something was already in motion, not just planned, in motion. Tell me what we're building, she said. Albrecht unfolded a physical map, actual paper, which startled her, because paper was almost impossible to obtain under the current resource restrictions, and spread it across the table between them. We're not building anything, he said. We finished building it 14 months ago. You're here because we're almost ready to use it. The paper showed nothing she recognized. No star systems, no navigational markers, no fleet positions. It showed currents. Deep space current flows, gravitational eddies, pressure differentials between stellar masses, the slow, invisible rivers that moved through the space between stars. A map of nothing in the traditional sense. A map of everything, in a sense the compact had never once considered. The compact counted our warships, Albrecht said. They counted everyone. You know what they didn't count? Yara studied the map. The currents formed lines. The lines formed routes. The routes connected points she was only beginning to recognize as strategic. They didn't count the ships that don't use stars, she said slowly. Albrecht nodded. They didn't count them because they didn't know they existed. And they didn't know they existed because every civilization in compact space builds ships that navigate by stars. Every ship in the galaxy runs toward a star because stars have fuel. Stars have gravity wells for braking. Stars have the infrastructure you need to operate a military force. He tapped the map. We built ships that navigate by nothing. No stars. No established lanes. No fuel infrastructure. They run on momentum and patience, and they travel routes that take 3 times as long as any standard navigational path. Why would you? She started. Because a ship running a 3 times longer route through empty space doesn't appear on any map that was built to track ships, he said. They're not in the demilitarized zones because they were never in the demilitarized zones. They're not showing up on the compact's sensor grid because the sensor grid covers navigational lanes, not empty nothing. Yara looked at the map again, the currents, the routes through the dark. How many? She asked. Petros Albrecht looked at her for a moment, as if calculating how the number would land. Enough, he said, but that's not actually the problem. The first misinterpretation had happened 11 months earlier, and it had happened because of food. The compact's occupation administrator for the Ferris cluster, a bureaucrat named Orvith Sek, whose species experienced stress as a mild vibration in their secondary thorax, and therefore chronically underestimated its presence in others, had noticed an anomaly in the human food distribution records. Several outer settlements in the Ferris cluster were receiving dramatically less nutritional resource than their population counts required. Not slightly less, dangerously less, by any biological standard Orvith Sek's analysts could apply. His first conclusion was hoarding. Humans had a documented tendency toward resource accumulation during periods of uncertainty. The compact's xenopsychology briefings had noted this. He ordered an audit. The audit found no hoarding. The food simply wasn't there. The settlements were, by any rational assessment, starving. They're conserving, his deputy told him. They believe demonstrating hardship creates political sympathy. Orvith Sek accepted this. It was logical. It matched the xenopsychology profile. It was wrong in a way that would not become clear for another 8 months. The food wasn't going to the settlements because the food was going somewhere else. Not hoarded, not withheld as political theater, redirected. The caloric output of 7 outer settlements had been quietly, systematically rerouted through a supply chain that didn't exist in any compact accessible database, feeding a workforce that didn't exist in any compact accessible census. The workers building ships in the dark needed to eat. The settlements had volunteered to provide for them. Not under orders, not under compulsion. They had voted on it. Every settlement, independently. The records of those votes were written on paper and stored in places the compact had no reason to look, in a script that had been quietly revived from a pre-digital human writing system, that the compact's translation algorithms had been trained on a corrupted dataset to misread. Yara hadn't known this when Albrecht told her about the fleet. She hadn't known people were hungry because of it. Albrecht watched her figure it out from the look on her face. The settlements knew, he said. Nobody forced them. How long have people been? 14 months, he said, since construction began. She stared at the map. People have been hungry for 14 months so that we could. So that we could have something the compact didn't count, he said. Yes. The welding sound screamed through the walls again. This time it didn't stop as quickly. That's worse than I thought, she said. It gets worse, Albrecht said. The fleet works, the routes work, the sensor gap works, but there's something you haven't asked me yet. What haven't I asked? You haven't asked why I need 14 engineers. Fleet Arbiter Senna Vale was conducting a routine review of shipping anomalies when she found the second cable. Not in the same system. 6 light-years away, in a region the compact had mapped as economically dormant. Another length of industrial cable, drifting in empty space, frayed at both ends, tied in a knot at its midpoint. She sat very still. Then she pulled up her original flag from the Cathara perimeter. The cables were identical in alloy composition, down to the trace element ratios. Same manufacturer, same specification, same distinctive knot, a double-loop configuration that her database identified as a specific human maritime tradition from their pre-spaceflight era, a method for marking anchor lines when visibility was poor. A method for marking where you'd been, so you could find it again. Her hand moved to file another debris flag. It stopped. She pulled up the navigational map of the space between the two cables. Not the standard map, the raw gravitational survey data, the kind of information that was collected automatically and then filed permanently without analysis because there was nothing in empty space worth analyzing. There in the data, barely visible against the noise, a pattern. Not a ship signature, not an engine trail, something subtler. A slight, recurring perturbation in the local gravitational gradient, the kind of distortion that occurred when a large mass moved through a region on a regular schedule over a long period of time. Senna isolated the pattern, ran it backward in time. The perturbations went back 14 months. Whatever had been moving through this empty space had been doing so for 14 months, on a repeating schedule, following a route that went from nowhere to nowhere, passing between two drifting cables that were tied in knots, so whoever was navigating could confirm they were on course. She looked at the region of space the route passed through. It avoided every star, every navigational lane, every sensor installation. It was a road built in the dark, marked with fraying rope. Senna felt something move through her secondary nervous system, the physiological response her species associated with confronting an impossibility. She opened a priority channel to Arbiter Principal Derv's office. "Arbiter Principal," she said when he answered, "I need to report something. I am not certain what I'm reporting." His response was immediate and dismissive. "Senna, we have 17 active fleet positions to monitor and a resource audit on the Ferris Cluster 2. The humans have been using the empty space," she said. "Silence." "The what?" he said. "The space between the stars," Senna said. "The space we don't monitor because there's nothing there. They've been using it for 14 months. Another silence, longer. "That's not possible," Derv said. "No civilization navigates through empty space. The fuel requirements alone." "I know," Senna said. "I know it's not possible. I'm looking at the evidence that it happened anyway." This was the second misinterpretation. Derv heard this and concluded Senna had found evidence of a small smuggling operation. A handful of ships, running illegal supply routes, nothing strategically significant. He was wrong. He dispatched 2 survey vessels to investigate. They found the cables. They mapped the gravitational trail. The trail didn't lead to a smuggling cache. It led to a region of space, deep, cold, unremarkable, where the gravitational signature suggested not one large mass in transit, but many. Many moving in formation. The survey report landed on Senna's desk at 300 station time, and she read it 3 times before she accepted what it said. Then she ran the size estimates against the compact's database of known vessel mass profiles. She ran it twice because the first result seemed wrong. The second result matched the first. "That's not a smuggling fleet," she said to no one. Yara understood what the engineers were for on the third day, when Albrecht took her down through the habitat's maintenance shafts to the lower hull junction. What was below the habitat wasn't part of the original structure. Someone had built, over months, using salvaged components and raw materials routed through supply chains the compact had never mapped, a fabrication bay. Not large by industrial standards, large by the standards of something that was supposed to be invisible. 3 technicians were working on a device the size of a cargo container. It was covered in cooling vanes and wrapped in what looked, at first, like decorative metal work. But the pattern was specific, mathematical. "What is that?" Yara asked. "Compact ships use algorithmic navigation," Albrecht said. "They calculate position relative to stars. Remove the stars and their navigation fails. Our ships were built to navigate by gravity gradients and momentum dead reckoning, human techniques, from before we had accurate star maps." "I know that part," Yara said. "What's the device?" "The compact's response when they find us will be to send ships into the empty space using emergency navigation protocols," Albrecht said. "Those protocols still work, but slowly. They'll be disoriented, operating at reduced effectiveness." "That's not an answer," Yara said. Albrecht looked at the device. "Our ships are in position. They've been in position for 6 days. On my order, they converge on 3 compact fleet bases simultaneously. The attack windows are calculated using the current positions, which change every 9 hours. You need the engineers to update the calculations," Yara said. "Every 9 hours, Albrecht said. By hand. Because the systems we'd normally use for that are networked and the compact monitors the network." She stared at him. "You have people doing orbital mechanics by hand every 9 hours to keep a strike fleet on target because the alternative is using a network the enemy can see." 11 people, Albrecht said, working in shifts for the last 6 days. "That's insane." "It works," he said. "How long can they keep doing that?" He looked at her steadily. "As long as they have to." Senna Vale's revised fleet count was completed at 700. She looked at the number for a long time without transmitting it. Then she did something she had not done in her professional career. She pulled the historical record of the armistice negotiation, specifically the clause that defined the demilitarized zones. The clause listed, with meticulous legal precision, the regions of space within which humanity was prohibited from maintaining military forces. The list was exhaustive. It covered every named star system, every established navigational lane, every registered transit corridor. It did not cover empty space. Not because of an oversight. Because the negotiators, compact negotiators, who had written the clause had not thought to cover it, had not thought there was anything in empty space worth covering. The humans had signed the armistice, completely, fully, with apparent sincerity. And then they had built a fleet in the one location the armistice did not prohibit, because it was the one location no one had ever thought to prohibit. Because no one had ever imagined a civilization that would choose to navigate through the dark rather than toward the light. Senna thought about the 43rd day after the armistice, when Arbiter Principal Derv had told the High Council that humanity was solved. Then she thought about the 14 months between that day and this one. What had been happening during those 14 months, in the spaces between the stars where no one was watching, on stolen calories and manual calculations, in habitats the compact had surveyed and dismissed. Humans had not been defeated. They had been waiting for the map to stop being watched. She transmitted the fleet count to Derv's office. His response came back in 40 seconds. "This number is wrong," he said. It's correct, she said. Where are they? Moving, she said, and I don't know toward what. The strike wasn't meant to destroy anything. This was the part Yara had not expected, and when Albrecht explained it, she sat with it for a long time before she said anything. We're not hitting the fleet bases, she said finally. We're hitting the logistics network, Albrecht said. Fuel depots, resupply nodes, communication relays, not the warships, the infrastructure the warships depend on. That doesn't win anything, Yara said, tactically. No, Albrecht said. Tactically, it hurts them for maybe 8 standard months. They rebuild. We haven't won a war. He looked at her. What it does is prove the fleet exists. It proves we built it. It proves it worked. And then we open a negotiation channel. Yara was quiet for a moment. You're not trying to beat them. You're trying to prove we can't be solved. The armistice happened because they believed they'd contained us, Albrecht said. The containment is their leverage for every demand they've made since. Reduced resource rights, restricted travel corridors, the population monitoring, all of it rests on the assumption that we have no options. He unfolded the paper map again, spreading it over the table. The current lines and the dark routes. We built something they didn't know we could build. We operated it in a space they didn't know could be operated in. We survived on less than they thought humans could survive on. We sent a fleet through routes their navigators can't follow, calculated by hand and shifts, by people who chose to do this. He tapped the map. We show them this, he said, and then we tell them, you don't have us solved. You've never had us solved. And the next fleet won't be 12 ships, and the next negotiation won't start from a position of your choosing. Yara thought about the settlements, the redirected food, 14 months of hunger chosen by vote. What if they escalate instead, she said. What if they just come at us harder? Then we learn what we needed to learn, Albrecht said quietly. And the next generation of humans builds something we didn't think to build. The welding sound came again through the walls. Are they still working down there? Yara asked. They never stopped, Albrecht said. At 1400 station time, the Compact's emergency fleet coordinators received simultaneous reports from 3 separate fleet bases. Their logistics communications were down, not jammed, not overloaded, surgically destroyed with the kind of precision that required knowing in advance exactly where every relay was positioned, exactly how the redundancies were structured, exactly which nodes, if removed, would cause cascading failure through the entire network. This knowledge was not publicly available. It was, in fact, the kind of operational knowledge that required someone to have been inside the Compact's military planning systems, or someone to have patiently, over 14 months, assembled a complete picture of the logistics network through observation, inference, and the small details that a careful and patient intelligence operation could extract from civilian shipping data. The Compact's intelligence division had been monitoring human communication networks for evidence of coordinated resistance activity. They had not been monitoring civilian shipping data. The third misinterpretation. The Compact had determined early in the occupation that human civilians and human military were meaningfully separate categories. Military personnel were potential threats. Civilians were a managed population. The distinction had seemed obvious. It was the most expensive mistake they made. Because the humans who had built the quiet fleet were not, in any official sense, military personnel. They were engineers and miners and freight workers and agricultural planners and people who had voted, in small rooms, to eat less so that something could exist in the dark. Senevale, reviewing the attack reports, felt the understanding arrive late and incomplete, the way understanding always arrived when the situation was larger than your model of it. She opened a channel to the human contact frequency, a diplomatic channel that had been mostly dormant since the armistice, and transmitted a single query. Who am I speaking with? The response came back in 47 seconds. Commander Yara Osai, unregistered vessel, currently located at coordinates I am not required to disclose under the terms of your armistice agreement, which I have read carefully. Senna absorbed this. Commander Osai, are you speaking on behalf of? I'm speaking on behalf of the people who'd like to renegotiate, Yara said. Specifically, the terms relating to resource rights, travel corridors, and population monitoring. We have a proposal. You understand, Senna said, that the Compact will consider this an act of war. I understand that the Compact, Yara said, has just discovered that their map of our military capability was incomplete. We'd like to discuss what else their map might be missing before anyone makes a decision that costs more than it's worth. Silence on the channel. Senna was calculating. Yara could hear the silence doing the work of calculation. How many ships? Senna asked finally. Enough to prove the point, Yara said. Not enough to win a war. We know the difference. We want you to know we know the difference. Another silence. You built an entire fleet, Senna said. In empty space over 14 months on, she was checking reports now. Yara could hear data being pulled, severely reduced food allocations, using manual navigation calculations, navigating by gravity gradient and dead reckoning, marking your routes with knotted cable. Industrial cable, Yara said. Salvaged, we had to cut costs where we could. Knotted cable, Senna said again, because it couldn't be detected. Rope doesn't have a sensor signature, Yara said. Old idea. Humans used it for a long time before we had better options. We went back to it. Your people, Senna said slowly, were hungry for 14 months. They chose to be, Yara said. That's the part I'd like your arbiter principle to understand. Not that it happened, that it was chosen, that we voted on it in small rooms and the answer kept coming back yes. Senna was quiet for a long time, long enough that Yara checked the channel was still open. I will relay your proposal, Senna said finally. I cannot make any commitment. I know, Yara said. Relay it and tell him one other thing. What? Tell him the cables were a message. We marked the route so our ships could find their way, but we also knew, eventually, someone else would find the cables. We left them deliberately. The first one was placed 14 months ago. A pause. You've been expecting us to find them, Senna said. We've been expecting you to find them when it was too late to matter, Yara said. Which is now? Arbiter Principal Derv's response to the human proposal was, initially, rage. This was understandable. Derv had told the High Council that humanity was solved. His credibility, his position, his career, all rested on that assessment. To discover that humanity had been, for 14 months, quietly operating in a space his entire analytical framework hadn't thought to examine, was not merely a military problem. It was a personal catastrophe. Find the ships, he told his fleet commanders. If they're in empty space, send ships into empty space. The fleet commanders sent ships. The ships entered the dark, operating on emergency navigation protocols, disoriented and slow. They found the gravitational trails. They followed them. The fourth misinterpretation. Derv believed that finding the fleet meant catching the fleet. Compact warships, navigating by emergency stellar protocol in deep empty space, covered distance at approximately 40% of their normal operational speed. The human ships, designed specifically for this environment, using routes they had practiced for 14 months, moved at full capability. The compact ships followed trails that were days old by the time they reached them. The humans were always somewhere else. They converged on a staging point, one of 47 staging points distributed through the empty space in a pattern that looked, on a map, like nothing, and looked, to someone who knew the current flows, like a coordinated withdrawal network designed for exactly this moment. Derv was informed of this. He stared at his fleet commander's report. They plan for us to chase them, he said. It appears so, Arbiter Principal, his commander said. They planned the retreat, Dare said, when they were planning the attack. Yes, Arbiter Principal. They built retreat infrastructure, 47 staging points, in empty space, while simultaneously building the attack fleet, while simultaneously running manual navigation calculations, while simultaneously feeding that workforce on diverted agricultural output, while simultaneously keeping all of it hidden for 14 months. His commander was quiet. They did all of that, Dare said, as a defeated civilization. Another silence. Arbiter Principal, his commander said carefully, I'm not certain defeated was ever the accurate characterization. Senevale was the one who ultimately made the argument to the High Council, because Derv could not make it without destroying himself, and because someone had to make it. And because she had found the first cable and understood, perhaps better than anyone, what it meant. She stood before the council and laid out the evidence in order. The fleet, the routes, the timeline, the food diversions, the manual calculations, the cables. Then she laid out the part that had kept her awake for the last 3 days. Not what the humans had done, but what it implied about what they were capable of doing next if the compact didn't negotiate. They showed us the fleet, she said. They didn't use it to destroy anything essential. They could have. 3 of the targeted logistics nodes, if struck with concentrated force rather than precision disruption, would have caused cascading failures across 12 star systems. They chose not to do that. One of the council members, old, skeptical, the kind of mind that trusted math more than inference, said, they held back because they knew we'd respond with overwhelming force if they struck that hard. Yes, Senna said. They knew that. So they chose the option that caused maximum strategic damage while giving us the opportunity to respond with negotiation rather than escalation. They calibrated their attack to the response they wanted. That implies, the council member said slowly, a degree of patience, Senna said. Yes, 14 months of patience. And before that, the patience to sign an armistice they had no intention of fully honoring, while identifying within the armistice language the one space it failed to cover, and then using that space in a way so unexpected that our analysts, who are very good, simply did not think to look. They cheated, another council member said. They were creative, Senna said. There is a difference. The armistice prohibited military forces in named spaces. They operated in unnamed space. Legally, she paused, and this was the part she had practiced because it had to land correctly. Legally, they were compliant. The silence in the council chamber was the kind that preceded a fundamental shift in institutional understanding. What do they want? The council chair asked. To renegotiate, Senna said, from a position that is no longer defined by our assumption that we have them contained. And if we refuse? Senna thought about the cables, the knots, the 47 staging points. Then I suspect they will demonstrate that the fleet we found, she said, was not the whole of what they've built. Yara was eating actual food, warm, caloric sufficient, when Albrecht told her the council had agreed to open renegotiation. She was on the habitat's upper observation deck, watching the particular emptiness of deep space, which was different from the emptiness of space near a star. Near a star, space felt empty because the star was the point and everything else was distance from it. Out here, the darkness was the point. She understood, for the first time, why the ship's navigators had started calling it the quiet. Not quiet as in peaceful, quiet as in the absence of the noise that usually told you where you were. You had to navigate by what you knew, not what you could see. They're going to try to minimize the renegotiation, Albrecht said from behind her. Treat it as an amendment, not a revision. We expected that, Yara said. We did, he said. We also expected that they'd spend the next 6 months looking for the rest of the infrastructure in the empty space, and not find it, and that not finding it would do more work for us at the table than anything we say. Is there more infrastructure? Yara asked. Albrecht was quiet for a moment. Yara, he said, what do you think the 47 staging points were for? She turned to look at him. He had the same expression he'd had when she asked what the engineers were for, the expression of someone waiting for her to arrive at the next level of the thing. They weren't just for the retreat, she said. No, he said, they were transit points, supply chain nodes, communication relays. For what? For the next phase, he said, which isn't built yet, which will take longer than 14 months, which will require things we don't currently have. He paused. But we'll have them, because we know now that it can be done. That's the thing the compact doesn't understand about us. Every time we do something impossible, we stop being afraid of doing the next impossible thing. Yara turned back to the dark. The settlements, she said, the people who went hungry. Most of them don't know yet that it worked, Albrecht said. How long until they do? A few days. Once we can transmit without the compact monitoring the channel and understanding what they're hearing. Yara thought about the votes in the small rooms, the answer coming back yes again and again. She thought about the engineers working in shifts, doing orbital mechanics by hand, every 9 hours, in a mining habitat that smelled like machine oil and failing solar cells. They chose this without knowing if it would work, she said. Yes, Albrecht said. That's the part that scares you, Yara said. It wasn't a question. That's the part that should scare everyone, he said quietly, including us. Senna Vale reviewed the renegotiation terms 3 weeks later and understood she would spend the rest of her career trying to answer the question the cables had first asked her. The question was not, what are humans capable of? The question was, where does it stop? She had studied the fleet's design in the intervening weeks, had spoken, through the diplomatic channel, with engineers who were willing to explain, now that it was over, the specifics of dead reckoning navigation in open space, the margins of error involved, the frequency with which a ship on a long silent transit could drift far enough off course to miss its target by a distance that made the mission pointless. How often did that happen? She asked. The engineer on the other end of the channel, a young woman not military who gave her title as Freight Operations Coordinator, said, often, at first. What did you do? We sent someone to check, the engineer said. Another ship on a parallel route to find the drifted vessel and relay corrected positioning data. Using what? Senna asked. Your communication systems would have been detectable. Light signals, the engineer said. Very old method, ship-to-ship, line-of-sight coded pulses. In the dark, Senna said. In the dark, the engineer said. We got good at it. Senna stared at her desk for a moment. How much of this was planned from the beginning, she said, and how much was improvised as problems arose? A pause, honestly. Honestly, Senna said. Both, the engineer said. The concept was planned. The details were improvised. Something broke or drifted or failed almost every week and we fixed it. We didn't have the option of stopping, so we got creative. You didn't have the option of stopping, Senna repeated. The compact gave us terms, the engineer said, matter-of-factly, without resentment, which was somehow more unsettling than anger would have been. The terms weren't acceptable. Stopping wasn't on the list. Senna thought about that for a long time after the channel closed. Stopping wasn't on the list. She had, in her career, reviewed dozens of defeated civilizations, species that had fought longer than probability predicted, species that had made sacrifices rational models didn't anticipate, species that had surprised the compact with their persistence. All of them eventually had stopped. They stopped when the cost exceeded the expected benefit, when the probability of success dropped below some threshold that the species, consciously or not, recognized as the point at which continuing made no sense. Every civilization had that threshold. It was a survival mechanism. It was rational. She pulled up the renegotiation terms, which the council had agreed to with the kind of reluctant precision that meant they were furious and had no other option. Better resource allocations, expanded travel corridors, reduced population monitoring in 12 settlement clusters. Not a complete reversal, not freedom, but movement, space, a direction. Achieved by people who had eaten less than they needed for over a year, and used rope to navigate and done math by hand in shifts, and built 47 staging points that had turned out to be infrastructure for a next phase that didn't exist yet. Senna thought about Derv's words on the 43rd day. Humanity is solved. She thought about the cable she had flagged as debris and moved past. She thought about the knot, a method for marking where you'd been so you could find it again. The compact had spent 14 months assuming that defeating humanity meant defeating humanity's military capacity. Had spent those months counting warships and monitoring networks and auditing resource distributions and watching the things that were visible. They had not asked what was in the dark, because nothing was ever in the dark, because no civilization had ever built in the dark, because the dark was not a place you built things, it was a place you passed through on the way to a star. Except for the one species that had decided, when the stars were taken away, that the dark was exactly what they needed it to be. Senna filed her final report on the incident. In the summary, she wrote 9 words that she knew would be read by people who had already decided they knew what the situation meant, and that those 9 words would be insufficient, and that she was writing them anyway because they were the truest thing she could say. They did not stop, they will not stop, renegotiate accordingly. She closed the file. Somewhere in the dark, she knew, in the spaces between the stars where the sensor grid did not reach, and the maps had no names, something was already being built. She didn't know what it was. She didn't know how long it would take. She knew with the cold certainty of someone who had held the first cable in her mind and followed its logic all the way to this desk, this report, this moment, that when the compact finally found it, it would be because the humans had decided it was time to be found. Not before. Not by accident. Never by accident. The galaxy had counted humanity's warships. It had built a map of everything humanity had, everything humanity was, every route humanity might take toward every star humanity might reach. The map was accurate. The map was complete. The map would always be missing something. Because humans did not need the stars to know where they were going. They just needed